Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, depending on where you are in the world right now. And again, welcome to BT and welcome to our auditorium and to the ITU Symposium. I want to start off with a question. It's a fairly rhetorical question for now, but I'll come back to it at the end of the presentation. And that is this. If we have the technology, and we seem to have the technology that people talk about, and what we're going to talk about today and tomorrow is probably no different to what we're going to talk about in the symposium that was held in April. Why aren't we doing it? Why aren't we delivering it? Why aren't people buying it, and why aren't we using it? And I think there are fundamental questions to the fact about having ICT adopted right across the globe that actually helps us to combat climate change, but also helps us to grow our businesses. And I'm going to come back to that later on in my presentation. But first of all, I want to actually start off by looking at where BT is and what BT has done so far. Now, Sir Mike talked about we have already reduced our carbon footprint from 1996 by 58%. That's absolutely true, and I want to stress that's absolutely a UK figure. It is not a worldwide figure. And Dr. Chris Tupping, that's going to be coming up on the stage in the next session, will talk more about our worldwide target. So I'm going to leave that there for now. So we've made some significant strides forward on our overall target. What we also talk about is the fact, and again, Sir Mike mentioned it, we actually consume 0.7% of the UK's total electrical power. That's huge. That's absolutely huge. And it doesn't sound very much, 0.7%, but one company. And that's all because of what we do as a business. And we're all in ICT, so we all know actually ICT uses electricity. That is the main source. That's the main power for all of us. So how do we actually reduce all of that? So our strategy fundamentally has always been to look at reducing our carbon footprint internally, first of all. Oh, sorry, can I just go back one? I seem to have pressed it too many times. 80% reduction is what we're saying we're wanting. 80% reduction in the UK, 80% worldwide. That's what we do internally. That's made up of things like our fleet, our estates, our data centres, our network, and our travel. But that's not enough. The strategy was then to look broader than our own boundaries. And those boundaries now include our suppliers. So how do we influence our suppliers? How do we get our suppliers to come along on the journey with us and to provide to us ever more efficient products and services, whether they happen to be pencils or an MPLS network? We then wanted to work with our customers. How do we, we've been in this area now, looking at it and driving down our carbon footprint since 1992. We've actually had our own environmental managers since 1990. And we set our first real sort of public target in 1996. So since then, we've actually done an awful lot to reduce what we do. And we've got quite a bit of expertise, we're not saying we're perfect, in actually measuring that, monitoring it, and actually working out the best and most efficient ways. So how can we help our customers do exactly the same thing? And then one of our key assets, the biggest asset that people talk about but don't use terribly well, are the people that work for us. And we have 112,000 people worldwide that actually work for us. So how do we engage 112,000 people to help us reduce our consumption? Help us to really find the ways in the organisation where we can cut out waste. So that's really the thread of our overall strategy. And I'm sorry it didn't come back. Oh, it did. There you go. So how have we actually achieved this? And we've achieved this primarily by doing things such as reducing or buying renewable energy from sources such as wind farms, hydro, all that kind of stuff that we buy from our suppliers, a big chunk of that reduction. We've actually looked at our overall efficiencies in the organisation and said, how do we drive that down? And that has a two-pronged benefit for the organisation. One, it drives out costs substantially. And with the ever-increasing energy prices, driving out costs has got to be a key business driver. So looking at that for us was a big area in terms of driving out those efficiencies and creating those efficiencies right across the business, not just in the networks, not just in the data centres. And, God forbid, we've actually started to eat our own lunch and use our own technology to help us through, to help us drive those efficiencies through, such as working flexibly, and I'm going to come on to this a lot more later. Reducing the travel, looking at how we can help our employees to work at home, how we can create that diversity within the organisation. We have 99% or 90% of our pregnant mums come back to work after they've given birth. That's huge, that's really high. And that's because of the flexibility that we give them through the technology that we actually sell and actually use ourselves. These are things that we have done. All these are areas that we've worked on to actually reduce our own carbon footprint. And these are still the areas we're focusing on going into the future because we're not doing enough. And Matt said earlier, you know, are we doing enough really? Is it enough what we're doing? Are the standards that we've got in place enough? So what I want to look at now is really looking at the key drivers for sustainability. And everybody, I think, in this room would agree, as long as you're not in a charity, that the biggest driving force for any organisation is getting profitable growth. Getting profitable business is absolutely key, above survival, of course. But profit is what really drives us, what drives our suppliers, what drives our customers, what drives our stakeholders. So how do you do that? How do you actually drive these things through? And if you look at the drivers in the second box, reducing energy costs, I've just talked about, absolutely fundamental. The second box, carbon footprint reduction. Actually, they go hand in hand. If you reduce your energy consumption, you can reduce your carbon footprint. If you then buy more from green sources, actually you're reducing your footprint even further. But everything you do should be around that. Legislation and regulation is really coming to the fore, not just in the UK, across Europe, across the world. People are actually saying, you know, how do we actually address this issue of climate change? So all the things that we've talked about, all the technologies that we've had, might actually now come under legislation and regulation, depending on whereabouts you are in the world. And that's a big thing for us, because actually we then really have to look at how we do business. We really have to say, you know, are we doing the right thing for the business, for the planet? Now also, are we complying with legislation in these same areas? As Matt said earlier, it's absolutely critical going forward that sustainable development is part of the business DNA. I've talked a little bit about the supply chain, so I'm not going to dwell on it here, but fundamentally, you've got to get your supply chain working in line with you. Because if your supply chain is not aligned to where you want to go, you will go further forward, but slower. So you've got to bring them with you. Technical advances, there is different technical advances every single day, every week. We talk about them, but how do you get those technologies adopted? And again, I'll come back to that. But what's really interesting, since 1996, especially for the UK, 1996, since 2006, especially in the UK, after Sir Nicholas Stern actually produced his report, the Stern Report, businesses all over woke up. Consumers woke up. It's been on the news and in the papers, in every form of media, every single day since the 16th of October 2006. This will now turn around. It won't be just us trying to push to customers. Our customers will be demanding it. And if I look just last year alone in terms of BT, we supported, and that's really just from the sort of environmental team and the climate change team and CSR team, we supported over £2.2 billion worth of bids. This is a real driver from customers. And if we don't address it and we can't answer their questions, those bids will go elsewhere. So they're the real, what I call, drivers for doing this. But what's influencing it? You know, in terms of our networks, congestion of networks, resilience of our networks, but not just of our networks, also of road systems as well. You can apply these rules to pretty much any industry. And the outcomes, every business wants the same sorts of outcomes. They actually do want their customers to be satisfied. They do want their shareholders and stakeholders to be satisfied. They do want them to keep coming back, and they do want to retain them. And that will automatically have an impact on your reputation and your brand. But more importantly, actually it enables diversity within your organisation. It creates better work-life balances. It enables people to do more from wherever they happen to live. And it was spoken about earlier, not taking people to the place of work, bringing the place of work to the people. And I'll cover that a bit more. If I look at sort of ICT here now, in terms of flexible working, in terms of what we've done, we now have 11,000 people working from home, full-time. We have 70% of our employees working flexibly. So what does this enable us to do? Because that sounds quite a lot. Actually, what that enables us to do as an organisation actually is to close down buildings. Closing down buildings saves a huge amount of money and substantial amounts of CO2. It also gives benefits back to our employees, because it actually enables our employees to have a better work-life balance. And what I mean by that is that we find that 21% of our employees, you know, are approving or saying to us that actually they're actually more productive when they work from home. We have Out of that group of home workers, 63% time less off sick. So all this productivity is coming about. We're allowing people to work from home that otherwise wouldn't be able to come into the office because they're either disabled and don't want to come to the office or can't, or they're actually looking after a young family and they've got to be there at certain times. This enables them to work very flexibly through the day from home. So lots of diversity issues. But it's not just about BT. ICT is about what we do globally with all of our customers, all of our suppliers. It's about how we, as an industry, get people to understand the benefits of flexible working, the benefits of conferencing. And if I come on to conferencing, last year alone, BT saved well over 97,000 tonnes, or avoided over 97,000 tonnes of CO2 emissions because our people used our technology on conferencing. We saved, in terms of hard currency, somewhere in the region of 230 to 240 million pounds. So it's a no-brainer. So why isn't every company doing this? Because if I look at BT and I look at our statistics, we have a 30% take-up on our employees of using our technology over a face-to-face meeting. It's about 2% for other industries, and government, it's even less. So why aren't we using it? And I'll come back to that sort of behavioural change piece that I've been sort of alluding to for a long time. Behaviour change is what's really required. That's the mindset shift. It's not technology. Technology is there. Do we trust our employees to work from home? Are we a manager that says, I don't trust my employee to work if they're not sitting in front of me? This is a big attitudinal change that people have got to go through. But also, it's a cultural thing. In Spain, for example, they don't work from home. It's not a policy they have. And why? Because most of the time they go home around about lunchtime, they meet their families, they have a family situation. But could they work from home? Could it be better? Who knows? So we're battling with behaviour and we're battling with culture. And they're two things that ICT alone cannot address. So I come into things such as, what are we doing in terms of home shoring? Home shoring is where we enable our data centre employees to actually work from home or from a different building. By using the latest of our technologies, call centres have now changed in all recognition. They can get questions in from the web, they can get it in from email, they can get it in from the phone. So when the phones aren't ringing, they can still be working and addressing other areas. But they don't actually have to be based anywhere at all other than their home or an office that's local to them. So why do data centres have to be out of town centres now? Big areas, big buildings that we put people in. They don't have to be. And home shoring is really allowing people of all different levels of ability, both physical and non-physical, to actually be in part of the workplace. So again, it's something that we're really looking at to try and drive even further forward. Flexible working I've talked about quite a lot, but the only thing that really makes flexible working work is the ICT. If you don't have the systems in place, and people talk about video conferencing, you know, part of my talk to most people is forget the video conferencing in the main. Actually, just pick up on net meeting, just pick up on audio conferencing, and you will save a fortune, and it's cheap. And I think that's one of the things we've got to look at. Video conferencing, telepresence situations around the globe are great, and they're great for those meetings where you really do need to feel that you're in the same room. But for most points, for most situations, net meeting or an audio conference works just as well. But what do you have to change to make it work? You actually have to learn how to run a good audio conference. It sounds stupid, but actually when you say to people, and I spoke to a colleague of mine, not a colleague, a friend of mine, she's a dean at a local university, and we were organising something inside this company called the Creative Challenge. And I said, we'll do it on an audio conference. And she'd never done an audio conference. She thought it was just the worst thing in the world that could possibly happen. At the end of the call, she went, oh, that actually works quite well. Because actually, you've got to structure it, and you've got to give people a chance to come in and talk. So being the moderator of an audio conference is actually not dissimilar to being actually in a physical room. But you've got to teach people to do that, because if you don't, they don't use it again. And it took a long time to take off, even in this company. Looking at unified collaboration and tools here, you know on your desktops you can bring them all together. But this isn't something that happens overnight. It doesn't happen in a simple package. Actually, you need some expertise to do that. And that's what ICT does. That's what we all do in this room. but bringing it all together, making it easy to use, will get it adopted. And then people have a sort of technology phobia. I mean, I do too, and I work in the ICT industry. You know, and then when Microsoft comes out with a different package every single year that doesn't work the same way that the last package does, and you have to relearn the whole thing again, and it all changes, drives me nuts. You know, these sorts of things, you know, we really should be able to get right, and it not working with the last system. These things are things that we really have to do, because if we have to keep relearning them, there is a point when you have a switch off. So I think that we've got a role to play here at looking at how easy we make things, how intuitive we make things. And I will make a plea. Yeah. Men, let some women have a look at it too. Okay? Because your logic is not our logic. And I think it needs a little bit of both. Looking at Philforce Automation, what have we done here? What we've done here is, you know, we've got 36,000 engineers, we've got 32,000 fleet vehicles. We're the 10th largest fleet in the UK alone. We have enormous amounts of CO2 in this particular area. So we have developed our own software that makes our Philforce engineers more streamlined, so that we get them in their own areas, we get them in their own patches, we don't make them go to appointments that aren't valid anymore. You know, this right first time sort of scenario. So you go there, you've made the appointment, you turn up, you do the work, you leave, you get it right, you don't have to go back. Customer satisfaction goes through the roof when you do that. So it's a no-brainer from that perspective as well. But we've also taken out the paper from our field force, and we've given them sort of robust PCs. They can drop them, actually. They're quite nice, and they don't break. But they put all of their information out on the PC, automatically in real time comes back to central office, and we know what's going on. I'm not saying we're perfect, I'm not saying we're getting it right all the time, but this is the area that we're really focusing on going forward. So that's all there. So what's happening now? What's actually happening, as I call it, around the corner? I'm going to come on to the new data center bit in a moment. But one of the things that is really going to come about are these pressure on the games market as well. We talk about our ICT. You know, an Xbox, huge power. PlayStations, huge power, when they're being played or when they're on standby. These markets have to change, because actually they're consuming more than your TV, your PC, and your fridge freezer all together. So we really have to look at this area, and there's going to be huge amounts of pressure, I think, on the games market going forward. Improvements in transport scheduling. You know, transport in itself, you know, if you happen to be living in Germany or Switzerland or even France, it's fantastic. Come to the UK, another story. So we've got a lot to learn, and we've got a lot that we can do in this country about sorting out our transportation. And we talk about the changing standards, and Matt mentioned it. Are we doing enough? We should be patting ourselves on the back. I'm not quite so sure. I'm with Matt on that one. Absolutely, I'm not sure that we should. But we need to get some consistency within those standards changing. And we need to look at it right across the piece. So if you are doing something in ITU, actually you need to be looking at it at the same time going forward into the games market. All these things need to work together, and they will come together as we go forward. Smart metering. We've talked about this forever, haven't we? I mean, smart metering, home automation, all that kind of stuff, all been going on, and I'll come on to that. And so we've got loads of things that are really happening and just around there. In terms of the data centres, oops, can I go back one, sorry? Thank you. I'm just getting a bit trigger happy, I think, with the button here. BT is really looking at how we can drive out the energy consumption of our data centres. We did this audit last year, and we went around and we saved on average 10% energy from every one of our data centres. And how did we do that? We switched things off that didn't need to be switched off. Simple. We removed cards that didn't need to be there. So just by taking things out, we've saved 10%. That's a financial benefit and a carbon saving benefit. But we're also looking at how we might move our data centres to have fresh air cooling, to use more renewable sources. So actually, do we keep them based in the UK? Do we keep them based in Europe? Or do we move them to Scandinavia, where actually renewable energy is there all the time and is far better and more efficient than we're actually using in the UK? It's a real option. And these are things that we really need to be thinking about and taking much more seriously as to how we move these things forward in the future. So if I look at some products which are really pretty much still in their infancy, we talk about always available broadband as opposed to always on. This saves huge amounts if you add up each line at 1 watt, that's huge amounts that we can save. And our 21CN, once we've absolutely implemented 21CN, line by line saving will save 30% on energy consumption. So these things are really, really making a big difference. When you look at the service carbon footprinting, here we've got an ability, a real ability, especially if we work together on this, to actually make a huge difference. If we can do carbon footprinting of our products and our services end to end, what will that tell us? We will know end to end what our carbon footprints are. And if we know that, you can really start to drive down energy efficiency. You can really start to bring on board more energy efficient products, more energy efficient through IP, through video, and so forth. So this is an area we're really looking at. Last year, we launched something called the Sustainability Practice, which is where we're helping our customers to understand what their carbon footprints are, and then helping them to reduce their carbon footprint. And ICT is actually used as a part of the solution, and it is part of the solution. What we're saying here in terms of automated carbon footprinting is actually automating some of those processes. And coming back onto the smart metering for the home and office, this is where we're looking at it saying, well, actually, should we be doing a carbon footprint for someone's total life? Should we be looking at it? Should we be having automated smart metering at home and what that person does all the way through their working day? Or is that really just too Big Brother? So, what else are we talking about? And again, we've been talking about these things for many, many years, but have we got them yet? And we look at monitoring solutions. Empowering, it says here, behaviour change through awareness of the reduced home energy consumption. We know that when you make somebody aware, that actually they will reduce their consumption levels. So if we then put that whole thing into the consumer's house and allow them to see it, will it reduce it even further still? Or do we put the demand back into the supplier? This is a fairly radical thought. Let the supplier decide, actually, when we can have energy and when we can't. It's an option. How much pushback will we get from consumers? How much will we get back from businesses? These are real things that you perhaps, we don't talk about, but these are the behavioural things that really will have an impact on society if we're serious about really reducing carbon footprint. Think lighting. We've been talking about think lighting since I've been in business, which is quite some years now. I won't tell you how many, because that really will tell my age. 10. Oh, I love you. Thank you. Think lighting. Is that the way to go? If we look at thin clienting, and even as they're now calling it lean clienting, and I think lean clienting has probably got much more chance of success than the thin client. Thin client where you put everything into sort of the servers and have a dumb terminal. But people actually do want some level of processing power on their desk, especially if you're in the industry of production of films or videos or automation of some sort. So the lean clients are probably where it's really going to go. And if you do that and you take out and you strip out most of the processing power, and you look at the total cost, you can take the typical PC of 120 watts down to 30 to 40 watts. That's a huge saving. The device itself is only about 10 watts of that. So again, these are things that we really should be looking at and doing. And the final one in terms of sensors, censoring the network. This is an interesting, where we're all being censored, I don't know about the rest of the world, but certainly in the UK it feels like we're being censored every 5 minutes with, CCTV cameras here, there and everywhere, and you can't even pick your nose in public now. Not that I ever did, but, if I wanted to. You can't do it because it's caught on about 350 cameras. So could we use the censoring a bit more? Could we use it to detect what's actually happening out there in terms of climate change, in terms of the environmental impacts? And can we adapt to that? Could we use it in a positive way? And can we actually sell that in a way that doesn't make people think Big Brother? And that's really what I wanted to say. It's much more about not the technology because we've got it, but how do we get people to use it? Thank you.